Today is the vlog for April 10th, 2018. I didn't have to look at the date this time because I looked before I started. Feeling kind of introspective today. I've done a bit more writing. I cleaned up what I had written yesterday, the Elite Dangerous fan fiction, and incorporated more of the notes that my friend sent me. But now I've gotten to a really hard part. So let me just explain the idea. I was a bit inspired by an old episode of Star Trek Next Generation. Maybe I explained all this the other night. I told my friend that I would be doing my vlog right now, so in the thought that he would then not start making my computer beep while I was doing this. So he's gone ahead and just made my computer beep while I'm doing this. The character is a young woman who came down with a fatal disease in the late 21st century, right after the end of the Third World War. So she was cryogenically frozen and put into a tube. I'm almost certain I said all this yesterday. If I just watch these things after I put them up, I'd remember. And she was launched into space. The idea being that the space station where the cryopod was stored would get power from the sun and wouldn't need as much, there wouldn't be anybody trying to pull the plug. It'd be very hard to go up there and pull the plug. But as time passes, the company that, oversaw the process was bought and by a new company that was then bought by a new company over the course of centuries. And eventually the station itself was dismantled. The pods stored on board were sent to other space stations elsewhere. And this just kept happening and happening for the 1400-year time span between the modern day and when Elite Dangerous is set. It's set in the year 3404? Or no? Might be, yeah, 3404, I want to say. And it's just by pure random luck that she's found by the character of my friend. I don't know how much role-playing I'm actually going to do, in this game, if any, because you never really see each other. If I did multi-crew on her ship, which is a huge ship with a gunner station, I would be able to, maybe tilt my head and see her character out of the corner of my eye. But the game doesn't have any sort of walk around simulator. Simulator? God. What is the tendency to label everything as a something simulator now? Because I was talking to people at work about a phone game where they call it a waiting simulator. The idea being that you have to play for a little bit of time unless you give real world currency to keep playing more. Basically putting quarters in an arcade machine. And the idea that you play and then wait, and then play and then wait, is a waiting simulator. Sure. I've heard of games called walking simulators where you literally just walk around and there's not a lot else to it. These aren't simulations, you're just walking. I mean, I guess you're digitally walking, but you're not digitally waiting in a waiting simulator. You're just waiting in real life to play the game again. That's not a simulator. That's just happening. Where was I? So the Elite Dangerous is planned. Elite Dangerous is planned to have some sort of mode where you can get out of your pilot seat and walk around inside your ship and also inside space stations and maybe even meet other players in the open game type. I like that idea. I think that's something that it is sadly missing. And I played the Star Trek Online MMO very briefly right when it launched for maybe a month or two at most. And I definitely enjoyed the flying around in space the most. The ground combat was sort of not very well polished. It was more fun to do ground combat in Champions Online, which was made by the same development studio. But they really had an interesting idea of how to do space combat in the Star Trek universe that really worked pretty well and felt very original compared to other games. But what you want is you want to be able to queue up a mission where you're out in space on your ship and then something happens on your ship. Like, how many episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, which is by and large the most popular Star Trek show of all time, just took place in the ship itself? You know? Why hasn't... I mean, there are games that sort of do this. Like, FTL is a game where you play as a crew of people where bad things have happened to your ship, and you're trying to, like, solve them. But it's like a very top-down, basic graphic kind of thing. Why not have, like, you know, a ship gives you a small environment and you can really push the limits of what you can, you know, visually represent in that environment? Why hasn't anybody made a game where there's an environment in your ship, and maybe you can even change the layout of your ship, but then, you know, do it like a tower defense game, or like Fortnite, where it's a hordes game. Eventually, waves of any shows up. Only it would be weird things happening in your ship, and you had to react to them and run around in the physical space of your ship, like solving these problems. And sometimes the problems are physical enemies, and sometimes they're malfunctions. Sometimes you have weird space science stuff where suddenly there are 5 clones of yourself, and you have to figure out what should happen to the clones, or if you need to merge back into one, or if someone has to sacrifice themselves for the rest of the clones. You know, very Star Trek style stuff. You don't even have to call it Star Trek if you can't get the Star Trek license, which is probably very hard to get. Make a game like FTL is obviously trying to go for that, but they don't have the Star Trek license, so they just call it FTL, which stands for Faster Than Light. I could go on for hours about how a really smart game designer would take a concept or a style from a game they like and shamelessly rip off everything but the intellectual property. Make new characters, new settings, new sorts of visuals, but keep that core. This is something that I said needed to happen to the Super Smash Bros. Games for years. Super Smash Bros. Isn't just a unique fighting game, it's the only one of a certain kind of genre, where instead of fighting to just deplete your opponent's health, you're fighting to put them in a position where you can knock them off the stage, and you can do that at various levels of that person having taken damage. If you're a really powerful character, you might only need a few hits to knock them off the stage. If you're a smaller, faster character, it might take longer, but you are better able to put yourself in positions. And this is a style of game that's basically become its own genre, but no one has thought... Everybody thinks that it's the Nintendo licensed characters that make it so popular. You talk to these people that have been playing Super Smash Bros. Melee for years, and it's that core mechanic that's never been copied anywhere else. Even the sequels to Smash Brothers were not as well received in the upper levels of the gameplay of tournament level players. Anyway, I don't want to get too much into this, but for example of how this can work and work very well, I have only to point you to Dota, aka Defense of the Ancients, which was a mod map for Warcraft 3, which came out in like 2003 or 2 or something, like well over 10, maybe even 15 years ago. This game came out, and there was a modded map, and we now have the mobile online battle arena genre, the MOBA. Dota MOBA. League of Legends took the idea, but they didn't take any of Warcraft's characters, and they certainly didn't take any of Dota's characters. They made their own characters, they made their own premise for why these sorts of battles were happening, and then just absolutely ripped off the mechanics. It's very hard to patent game mechanics, and certainly most people that would even be able to do so don't think that they can. I remember when Magic the Gathering patented tapping, like literally activating a card, usually turning it sideways, to represent it having been used and not being able to be used again until you take another turn. They patented that. And it was just within the last 3 or 4 years that patent expired, and now anybody can use it, which was a sticking point to the people who made an online card game called Hex, which is basically Magic, but using a bunch of things that only work in an online computer space, like keeping track of individual tokens or units independently of the cards themselves, which has always been a bit of a hassle for players of Magic. But, you know, start talking about fan fiction, and here I am talking about very basic game concepts and how you can take a concept or a style or a trope or theme and use that to make something new, something that is your own, something where you don't have to pay a mile mountain of royalty fees to somebody. Food for thought. It was a super nice day. It started off raining and it was just gross and terrible, and it ended up being an extraordinarily nice day. I took off my jacket at lunch and didn't put it back on, and tomorrow I'll have to put it back on in the morning, and it will probably rain all day, but I wouldn't mind a few more days where it says it's going to rain and it just ends up being super nice. I would not mind that at all. This has been Eric Spornitz, and tomorrow will be better.